My apologies. I escaped from my other meeting. We'll begin with the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And we have the minutes of the May 9th meeting, 2023. Are there any additions, corrections, comments? Those are on pages 1 and 2 of your packets. Very good. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Dean and Kay. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? So moved. Do we have any public comment on agenda items today?
No.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the audience? If not, we'll proceed with planning. Mr. Prologue, you're on deck.
I'm on deck, huh? Good morning.
Morning.
Hey. Chipper. All right. Today is a pretty big day for us in the sense that we are going to be asking your recommendation for approval of the 2050 plan, our long-range component. I'm going to get to that momentarily, but we have a public comment report to go over. I believe it starts on page 3 of your packet. I believe 2 comments did come in. Sue Mahalo. We did respond to her comment as well as the comment that was posed by David Wright of GPTC. So those were the only 2 comments of significance that we received. Really, when we determined them, they were both not significant, but those were the 2 comments of any substance that we received during our 30-day comment period about a month or so ago for the 2050 plan. So I don't think we need anything else regarding that matter. Is there any questions on the public comment report?
Any comments on the comment?
No, I actually forgot I commented on it. You guys resolved it that quickly.
Thank you. Your comments are appreciated.
Thank you, David.
And Susan as well.
Okay.
Let's move on then.
So yes, moving on, Resolution 2310, this is the adoption of the 2050 plus long-range plan. We had a pretty large presentation on this matter back in April, I believe, before the TPC and the Commission ahead of the public comment period, so I'm not going to go through that in detail again. This is more of an overview to kind of catch you up to what we're dealing with here. The background of the 2050 plus, it is our long-range plan that we're required by federal law to update every 4 to 5 years, and we have to have a 20-year planning horizon on the plan. That's why it says 2050. We are safe within that 20-year planning horizon. We will be coming back again in about 4 or 5 years, actually 4 years, to work on either 2055 or 2060. And our main focus areas here, we are continuing it. So usually what happens during the way NERC has operated for the last 30 or 40 years is we put out a general plan on the kind of every decade, so to speak, and then we do an update to that plan. So this is in line with what we did with our 2040, where we did an update to that plan, where we don't do any significant additions or revisions to the plan itself. We kind of update the goals and objectives that we have first laid out in that decennial plan, and then we move on with the update. And this is really no different. We are continuing our focus areas in the 2050 document of Connected, Renewed, United, and Vibrant. And those focus areas are echoed throughout the entire planning document. It is to provide practical and measurable solutions to these areas. And of course, with the new act of IIJA, the Infrastructure Act, which was adopted last year by Congress, that is the major federal transportation funding bill that we are under and have received guidance from. We have also decided to mirror their emphasis areas with resiliency, housing, carbon reduction, and significant freight focus going forward here with this plan. The timeline is thus, we are now at the end of that era, finally. The anticipated adoption after our air quality is determined, we'll get to that momentarily, but as you can see, we've been on this from the 2050 adoption back in May of 2019, and have continued it through implementation, and then of course moving on towards the current status of putting this forward for approval. And unlike our previous plans, we decided not to hire one but three firms to work on different components of this plan along with NERC staff. And what we have come up with are 7 chapters of interesting noted focus here, which includes active transportation, climate and the environment, freight, land use and housing, roads, and transit. So we're trying our best to offer a very clean look at these objectives going forward in the next 20 to 30 years here at NERC. And what I'm going to do is kind of go through this briefly about the major highlights each of these chapters have. When we talk about active transportation, one of the largest issues that we are talking about are completing our network. We have had many trails funded in this region for many years. We have nearly 200 miles of regional trail built, which is great. But as I always tell people, those are our interstates, okay? Those are non-motorized superhighways, so to speak. So we have to get to them somehow. And the idea is trying to get people safely to our trails throughout the region where they don't have to drive the trailheads constantly. And many trails are located within a mile or two of residential areas who have a very difficult time of accessing them. You can think about trying to find your way to the local supermarket or drugstore from your home by bike or by ped. That might give you chills just thinking of it. So we're trying to improve the network. This is an active network map. Of course, this is the quintessential 50,000 foot view of it, but we get into the plan in very significant detail in each of these areas. Pretty much all those red lines have been spelled out within the plan in a table identifying where they're at, what type of treatments we would propose for those particular segments to bring them up to speed and making them safer for bike and pedestrian use so people can get throughout this region safely and connect to their destinations accordingly. We get into the areas of environment and climate as well. We have quite a bit regarding how transportation and climate change has been affecting our region. And we point that out quite pointedly throughout the document, throughout the environmental section, on how to try to curb the use of fossil fuels throughout our region and improve our climate through transportation choices. Of course, active transportation does play a role in that as well. We get into conservation as well and talk about the lands of focus throughout the environmental section, and again, how we can maintain and actually expand some of our native habitat throughout Northwest Indiana. I think all of us in this room are very cognizant of the ecological diversity that's present in Northwest Indiana. We simply want to enhance and build upon that. And we also talk about transportation in the sense of freight. And we have a lot of issues regarding freight in Northwest Indiana. As you know, being Northwest Indiana, being near Chicago, and the fact that Lake Michigan has crunched all the transportation corridors into these 3 counties of NERC, we have a huge diversity of freight options that we have explored in more detail than we ever have before. The freight chapter is extremely robust. It talks about every type of freight movement throughout Northwest Indiana. It talks about how they can be improved. Some of the substandard issues, gaps within the mobility of the freight network are addressed quite heavily. We talk about consumptions. We talk about centers of corridor framework as well throughout the plan. And within this case, we talk about land use, which is specific on these slides. Again, land use is an issue that we don't have any direct relation to at NERC in the sense of any type of authority. As I always tell people, we advise and inspire, and that is nothing different within this particular chapter. But we really get into focus here on land use. We talk about different scenarios of consumption. We talk about how we can get into a system of land use decision-making throughout Northwest Indiana that can better our future, and we propose those throughout the land use part of the document. And we talk about as well in the sense of roadway conditions in Northwest Indiana. Roadways, as you well know, are our main ways of getting around this region, and that is nothing different than the entire United States of America. Over 85, if not 90% of us get around by car. And the rest of us usually don't either have a car or not able to drive, don't have the means to do so. So we have to accommodate all forms of transportation, but right now, car traffic is king, and as you can tell from this heat map, there are quite a few crashes in Northwest Indiana. What we want to do is focus on those particular areas, try to channel funding into these areas to improve that particular roadway network, and of course propose other alternate ways of people getting around other than by automobile. Of course, I'm talking about active transportation, but we also have some transit options that we want to unfold as well throughout this document. So we do pay close attention to our roadway network and how we can improve that. And then we do complete with the transit section. The transit is actually broken up into two proposals, one being a grid system proposal, the other being a hub system proposal. Again, I'm not here to talk about those in great detail, but the chapter definitely does so. It's probably one of our more significant documents afforded to the future of transit expansion in Northwest Indiana, and we did work pretty closely with our stakeholders throughout the planning, not only this chapter, but every chapter throughout the document. So what do we do from here? Well, we're here to get your recommendations or approval for the plan. If it is approved, or if you guys are recommending denial, either one will be sent to the commission for their approval on July 20th. And then after that, we begin the process of implementing the plan, because we are not about having dusty plans around here. We are going to filter the implementation strategies through topical committees, through our social media, strategic email blasts, that we're looking to prepare presentations before municipal boards, guest speaking for chambers, clubs, etc. So we would welcome our attendance at your local council or redevelopment or plan commission meetings to kind of unpack what we have done here with 2050 to try to get these proposals more in line to what the communities are doing, and of course bringing the communities together through these proposals. And if you have any ideas about chambers of commerce or other types of organizations, Rotary, Lions, Elks, if you let us know, we'd be more than happy to make the time to present this, to make the public aware of what we're trying to accomplish on the regional level. So as I said, this was a very broad overview of what the 2050 Plus plan is. It has been available online on our website for the last couple of months, and we will be having this available primarily as an online document, although we will make print for resource like libraries, and of course every municipality is planning on getting a copy of this document at our commission meeting next week. So we have a lot of printing to do here at NERC. So is there any questions on the 2050 document?
Or comments?
Or comments?
Anybody at all?
I have a comment. Recently, we have started a township trustees meeting on a quarterly basis for the county for the rural areas. I think this would be an ideal opportunity to extend out beyond the municipalities to the rural areas. If they have someone to reach out or that documentation, I can take and share with all the trustees for the county.
Sure. Notify me. I notify
Okay,
you.
well, so bring it up so I can make sure.
Thank you, George. That's exactly what we're looking for, township trustee meetings. I mean, there are so many meetings, I can't keep a hand on it anymore. I know a lot of municipal officials and different bodies and different elected officials get together for various events, and so we want to be in the middle of that and get this out there.
Any opportunity to spread the word, George, and I'm sure staff will help you with making the presentations.
It's Thursday.
Maybe not next Thursday, but
When it gets us adopted, we'll be more than happy.
any other comments, questions?
Nicely done.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for your input throughout, especially the environmental chapter. Kathy was all over you with that, so thank you.
And thank you all for your participation. The action request is recommend this to the commission next week. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Buck. Any other comments, questions? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? So moved. We'll make a recommendation to the commission next week.
Thank you all.
Commission's at 10 or 9
9.
on the 20th. Thank you.
They wake up a little earlier.
It's a little bit longer meeting too. Urban area boundary presentation, Mr. Weber.
Yes, good morning, and thank you. So I am, along with the help of my colleague Grace Benninger, we're going to go through the 2020 Census Urban Area Adjustment Process. This is an informational item this morning, so there's no action being requested, but we're going to go through what this is all about and help unpack it for you all, and perhaps introduce the opportunity to follow up with us about it. So first of all, what are we talking about this morning with the 2020 Census Urban Areas? Well, basically in December of 2022, so just about 6-7 months ago, the census designated these urbanized areas. They do this every 10 years, but then they give you 1 year from when they come out with those designations to adjust those urban areas. So in other words, smooth over the boundaries of these urban areas. And so we're in that period of time, but we don't have a whole lot of time left. So it's important that we kind of get going on this process. And so this presentation is about how we anticipate going through this process. But first I want to kind of untangle what an urban area is versus a metropolitan planning area. The geographic area that you're probably thinking about in the context of NERC is the metropolitan planning area. This is actually codified in state statute in Indiana code, and this just includes all of Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties. That's just the NERC region as we think of it. However, there are some federal requirements about the metropolitan planning area at a minimum and must incorporate all the applicable urban areas, which I'll get to in a second, and adjacent areas expected to become urbanized within 20 years. However, of course, it would not be easy for us to change the metropolitan planning area. As I said, it's codified in the state statute, so we don't anticipate the need to change that. But on the other hand, there's this geography called urban areas. These are delineated, like I said, by the Census Bureau every 10 years. And so in order to meet the criteria of being designated as an urban area, the area has to have at least 2,000 housing units or 5,000 population, and at least one nucleus of at least 1,275 housing units per square mile. So there has to be a density nucleus of these urban areas. And throughout the entire urban area, you have to meet a density threshold of at least 200 housing units per square mile. So the result of the December 2022 action of the delineation of the urban areas was that there were 3 urban areas in our region with 50,000 plus population. Those were, not surprisingly, Chicago, Illinois, and Indiana. There's a portion of Indiana that is in the Chicago urban area, as we know. A lot of Lake County and significant portions of Porter County. The Michigan City, this is also by state, Michigan City LaPorte technically, Indiana and Michigan, so it includes areas around Michigan City and LaPorte, as well as into Southwest Michigan. The portion into Southwest Michigan this time around actually goes much further than it did 10 years ago. Instead of just going up to roughly Grand Beach, it goes all the way up to somewhere almost all the way to Sawyer. And then there's a third one in our area, Valparaiso Shorewood Forest. This is a new one. This is a new one this time. It's never been designated, as far as we know. And this barely meets the 50,000, being over 50,000, but there's about 52,000 or so population in this area. So then, now that I've talked about kind of what these geographical areas are according to the Census Bureau, let's look at how this differs compared to previous years. First of all, based on the 2020 census, we now are looking at either a population or a housing unit threshold criteria. Prior to the 2020 census, the urban areas were only delineated using a population threshold. And that population threshold was 2,500 people for 100 years, from 1910 to the 2010 census. But in 2020, they started raising that to 5,000 population. Also, this is getting very wonky, but the jump threshold was reduced. In other words, this kind of affects the spatial arrangement of these urban areas. It was changed back to only 1.5 miles. It was 2.5 miles briefly for the 2010 censuses, but starting in the 2020 census, it was moved back to 1.5 miles. And basically, only one jump was allowed on any given corridor, though unlimited pops of areas of a half mile are allowed, as long as all pockets of the connected jumps and hops meet the minimum housing unit threshold, as I said, of 200 housing units per square mile. This is basically the way that all of these urban areas get delineated geographically. Also, beginning with the 2020 census designations for urban areas, there are no longer urban clusters. In 2010, you might have heard that Lowell, Hebron, Westville, and New Carlisle, which included Rolling Prairie in our region, were the urban clusters. However, certain populations with small urban areas between 5,000 and 49,999 are simply designated as urban areas. These include Lowell, Lakes of the Four Seasons, and Westville this time around, but they're under 50,000, so they don't really pertain to NERC funding activities because of that, although we do have some small involvement, and they do pertain to potentially other federal programs as well. So I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Grace Benninger to go through some of the mapping exercise that we did in looking at the 2020 designated urban areas.
Hi everyone. So here on the screen you can see the 2010 urbanized areas. So the solid colors are the urbanized areas. So here you can see the Chicago, Illinois, Indiana urbanized area, just the Indiana portion. And then here you can see the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urbanized area. And as Scott was saying, there are a few clusters shown on this map, including the Westville urban area, the Hebron cluster, as well as the Lowell cluster. And so the red striping that you see is what the adjusted boundary was determined to be in 2010. So as you can see, it was more of a inclusive adjustment in the sense that a lot of area was included in this urban area. Approximately 132 square miles were included. And then there was adjustments are made to help align the urban area boundary to municipal boundaries as well as other local boundaries. It's also adjusted to help provide connectivity to transportation corridors, and is also adjusted for to remove any irregularities in the shape of the boundary. And then on this slide, you can see the 2020 urban areas that were designated after the 2020 census was completed. So you can see that the Chicago, Illinois, Indiana urban area is still the largest in the NERC region. And then we also have the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urban area, as well as the new Valparaiso Shorewood Forest urban area. So some of the main differences from the 2010 designated urban area and the 2020 urban area was the clusters for Westville and Lowell have been designated as just urban areas. And then the Lakes of the Four Seasons urban area was also designated. The Hebron urbanized cluster was removed, however. Another large difference is the extension of the Michigan City, LaPorte, Indiana, Michigan urban area, which extends pretty far up into southwest Michigan along the coast of Lake Michigan. And then obviously the new Valparaiso Shorewood Forest urban area was also a major development from 2010 to 2020. So on this slide, you can see a little more in detail this new Valparaiso Shorewood Forest urban area that's in purple. The Chicago urban area is in blue. This is overlaid on aerial imagery, so you can kind of get a sense of how this area was designated. So not all of Valpo proper is included in the Valparaiso Shorewood Forest urban area, but in the same stance, there's also areas that are not within Valparaiso city limits that were added to the urbanized area, especially on the north side of Valpo, as well as the southwest and southeast sides of the city.
Real quick, could you go back to that previous slide? Just clarification.
Yes.
The hospital. Is that in the Chicago or Buffalo urban area? Looks like, is that US 6 up there?
It would be closer to Chicago.
Yeah, this is.
Is that up there? Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
So it's actually in the Chicago,
Yeah, that is.
Indiana. Okay.
So you might be asking, so what are the implications of being included in an urban area? So I'm going to briefly go through some of these. So for funding eligibility, proportions of populations included in an urban areas in the NERC region versus other urban areas throughout the state and the country. Basically, there are implications in terms of the apportionments of the formula programs. Also, in particular, STBG funding is categorized, as we know, into Group 1, which is large urban areas, Group 2, small urban areas, Group 3, which is usually municipalities of less than 5,000 population, and Group 4, rural. And MPOs like NERC usually select projects for Group 1 and 2 funding completely under our authority. We still have a pretty significant say in terms of with INDOT on Group 3, but we don't really have that much say when it comes to kind of Group 4, at least in the past. So that's kind of a very, very high-level overview of what some of the funding eligibility implications are, and I'd be happy to refer you to questions of our other staff, like Charles and myself maybe, that might be able to help answer some of those. But when it comes to roadway inventory, urban versus rural mileage is still officially inventoried for state and federal purposes and affects reporting as well as some other designations such as the critical urban and critical rural freight corridors. This was an exercise that we went through back in 2019 where we looked at designating critical urban freight corridors in our region. But it's important to keep in mind that there still are official tallies that INDOT keeps of the mileage for urban versus rural, so this will still be affected under these designations. When it comes to transit, 5307 funds are specifically defined by a formula that uses urban area status. Transit providers will need to participate in the planning activities for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, so NERC for each of the UZAs, or urbanized areas. The Metropolitan Planning Organization transit providers in the state will be required to coordinate the programming of federal transit program funding, as we already do, but it's important to keep in mind that as these geographies get delineated every 10 years, that we're basically casting our net wide enough to include all these potential operators in these areas. And that transit providers that are eligible public entities may elect to become or remain a direct recipient of federal FTA funds. Direct recipients are subject to additional oversight by the FTA, which includes additional reporting requirements and a triennial review every 3 years, and other compliance reviews as well. When it comes to projects continuity, it's important to keep in mind that projects that are already included in a USDOT approved TIP will not be affected by any of these designations. Those are kind of grandfathered in already. But we need to keep in mind that projects planned for that you may have been thinking about based on previous geographies may need to be reassessed based on these designations as we go forward. But we're going to be working through a lot of those implications, and trust us, we will make it as smooth as possible for your community as you're thinking about this. And then when it comes to performance-based planning and programming, there are 2 USDOT required performance measures. The percentage of, these are related to congestion, the percentage of non-single occupancy vehicle work commute mode and peak hours of excessive delay per capita that use the urbanized area geography. And finally, when it comes to outdoor advertising, aka billboards, there's a law that basically allows for billboards greater than 650 feet from the primary route right-of-way. So primary route means like interstates and limited access highways. That are inside the adjusted urban areas to be exempt from state regulations. So they would only be subject to any municipal imposed kind of ordinance regulation. But in rural areas, these billboards are regulated in the entire view shed. So for basically wherever you can see them from the highway. So that's another important implication. So then the question is, what will adjusting these urban area geographies not affect? It will not affect funding levels. Unfortunately, our funding levels are our funding levels. So both federal highway and federal transit funds will be apportioned based on the unadjusted delineations that came out in December of 2022. So nothing we do from this point forward will adjust the formula that basically affects how much money we take in. For functional classification, beginning with MAP 21 back in 2012, roadway functional classification is no longer tied to urban versus rural. But as I mentioned earlier, the inventory and reporting is still sorted as noted before with the inside the urban area versus rural areas. And for transit, FTA really does not consider adjustments to urbanized areas for any purposes. Those implications that I talked about earlier related to transit are just based on the unadjusted as they were designated in December. And so that's why those are critical. And so what is the adjustment process? You might be asking about how we as NERC staff plan to engage your communities and our state and federal partners on adjusting our census-defined urban areas before the deadline, which we anticipate being around December of this year. So states and metropolitan planning organizations, in coordination with local officials, are allowed to, as I mentioned, adjust the census-designated urban areas. This is according to federal law. We must include the entire census-designated urban areas. Adjustments may only expand the urban areas. In other words, based on the delineation that came out in December, we're not allowed to shrink those delineations, but we can slightly expand them to smooth them over. NERC last approved the 2010 adjusted urban areas all the way back in December of 2012. So it's been a very long time for all of us, and we really didn't have hardly any staff that were still around back then. So this is kind of a new process for all of us, for a lot of you as well. As I mentioned, the 2020 adjustments for the urban areas are due to Federal Highway. We'll really do that first by December of 2023. The latest we're actually going to get them there sooner, hopefully, as I'll mention soon. And INDOT must approve of our proposed adjustments and submit them to the Federal Highway Administration for final approval. So it's kind of, that's a very high-level process of what we're expecting based on what we're allowed to do. But then kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're actually doing to make these adjustments. So to prepare the draft of the adjustments, and I'll let Grace talk about our draft so far, is that, as I mentioned, we have to begin, we're going to begin with the 2020 adjusted urban area boundaries. So basically what we did in December of 2012. We're going to kind of use that as a starting point because our philosophy is if a community kind of expected to operate under the assumption that they were inside an urban area and a process that we had really no impact on whatsoever. Some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. in December of 2022 decided to adjust the urban areas. We think that we should at least kind of consider starting with what we already had for the last 10 years. Then what we would be doing is we'd extend the 2020 unadjusted urbanized area boundary to areas not included in the 2010 adjusted urban area. That's actually required by federal law, as I mentioned. So if an area was outside those 2010 adjustments, but now inside the 2020 unadjusted, that would automatically have to be inside the urban area as well. We would also want to extend to municipal boundaries if it's outside of these first two steps, because we kind of have the philosophy that our local communities know best, that they strategically kind of annexed and provided services to areas that are in their interest to continue expecting to be more of that urban in character versus rural. So we're going to strongly consider municipal boundaries in addition to the first two steps. We would also extend to incorporate federal aid route continuity. So in other words, while I mentioned that projects that are already in the TIP are not going to be affected by this adjustment process, we still want to anticipate kind of reducing those consequences further down the line by looking at if the route weaves in and out of an urban area, it's probably best to just include all of that route inside the urban area, just to kind of make it simpler. We want to also consider any obvious physical features that may have been missed from the unadjusted 2020 urban area boundaries and the first steps above. And then consider existing and future TIP projects to ensure that projects are within the adjusted urban area boundary. Because there might be future projects that didn't quite make it in, but we want to make sure that we're not going to automatically disqualify their eligibility for certain federal funding titles just because this process changed. So I'll turn it back over to Grace to explain kind of this draft 2020 urban area adjustment.
All right, so NERC staff internally kind of just started on a launching point to create a draft adjusted area, which you can see here in green. So all of this green area that you see is the adjusted boundary. So this is everything that was included in the draft adjustment. And as Scott was saying, that these adjustments were made by examining municipal boundaries as well as the 2010 adjusted boundary and then also paid close attention to follow interstate freeways and arterial roadways, as well as consider any future transportation planning projects when creating this draft. And so this slide, you can see a little bit clearer in specific areas how this adjustment was made. So the lighter areas, the lighter blue, the lighter purple, and the lighter orange are all the adjusted urban area, the draft adjusted urban area. And so NERC's plan is to meet with all of these communities that are kind of on the edge of this urban area boundary to kind of finalize this adjustment. As Scott said, we do very much so value your knowledge and input.
So kind of just carrying on with the theme of what the adjustment process is going to look like in the upcoming months is that we are going to review with our stakeholders. We're going to schedule a series of one-on-one meetings with the peripheral communities around the edges. So Charles Bradsky, I think, already sent out a series of emails to those particular communities. So we'll look forward to kind of scheduling those so that we can get your local input and feedback about our draft 2020 urban area adjusted boundaries. We want to determine any possible conflicts or missed areas prescribed in our NWI 2050 plan, or also our soon-to-be adopted, we hope, NWI 2050 Plus plan. And then we will refine the draft of those adjusted boundaries based on feedback on these first two items I mentioned. And we're seeking to obtain the Technical Planning Committee approval and Executive Board approval of the adjusted boundaries in October this year, and then submit that to DOT for review. So that should meet the December deadline that I mentioned. And it's kind of going back to what this process looked like 10 years ago or 11 years ago. So, Grace?
Yeah, so this was just kind of refreshing. You can kind of see how this was expanded back in 2010. I know we kind of went over this at the beginning of the presentation, but just to kind of to clarify how this was adjusted in the past versus what it looks like now. Just so you all have an idea. And if anyone would like these PDF maps or paper maps or the GIS layers used to create these maps, just reach out to me and let me know.
Do we have your email address?
It's gbenninger@nerc.org. It should be on the website, and I can give anyone a business one. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Scott has more to say.
Oh, are there any questions?
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
go ahead.
Just wondering, how does this in any way relate to census tracts? Do you sort of line up with existing census tracts for the boundary conditions?
Probably not.
I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think it's the census tracts that they're using in order to delineate the urban area. I believe it's just the population and the housing unit density that they're using. They're not, I don't think they're necessarily going by census tract. They might be using lot groups.
Lots or lot groups. I mean, they're looking at a very localized geography.
I would suggest you research a little bit more into that. My introduction into this had to do more with stormwater, as with Mr. Buttons. And they kind of threw that in there that we had the urbanized areas, we had to follow certain EPA and IDEM rules. So we had to be clear that at least those areas, and they gave us the opportunity to make even bigger areas, but the liabilities increase.
So we've kind of gone over a lot of these themes about what our next steps are going to be. But basically, we will continue coordinating with INDOT and the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning on how the Illinois side of, or what we're doing on the Indiana side might affect what's going on the Illinois side, as well as the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission about the Michigan City LaPorte urban area and how that might affect the Michigan side of things. We will revise the draft map, and we will recommend undertaking the urbanized area adjustment with individual meetings, like I mentioned, with the peripheral communities and stakeholders, and schedule these meetings in July and August mainly. And then we will bring the urbanized area boundary recommendations to TPC on October 10th. And then provided that this committee recommends approval, then we'll present the final boundaries to the commission for their approval on October 19th.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Beth.
What is the process for deciding how the funding is managed with the multiple UZAs that used to be one? So it's outside this process. This is very clear what you presented.
This is a technical exercise about making sure that we have the geographical areas smoothed out.
Right.
But what you're mentioning is going to be something that we'll have to kind of learn in the next, as we implement these areas, and we'll have some say in terms of how we operate our programming processes and in order to kind of mitigate any impacts that this might otherwise have versus how you're used to doing things at Emergency. And so we feel pretty comfortable that there will be some wiggle room to achieve that. You know, we've already heard that basically in the South Bend Elkhart area, they deal with two separate pots of funding, but they kind of ensure that at MACOG that they're kind of using both sources in a pretty seamless way. So we hope to kind of, and INDOT allows that process. I mean, obviously it's a apples to oranges comparison in a sense, because those are very equal, or almost equal, a lot more parity in terms of the population sizes. But we probably will be able to achieve something of that sort if we work through that.
My suggestion is you meet with the 3 county planners as soon as possible, make them aware of what you're doing to get some kind of support, and then also the city planners, such as that. But we have a few more of this room that can provide you significant input. I heard about billboards, and that kind of put me on alert about how that's going to impact part of the private sector out there in the county. I'm not quite sure how that is. That's a planner problem, so we'll leave it to them to figure it out.
I'm curious, what are the state regulations on billboards?
I'm not an expert on that.
Okay.
That's why we need the county planner. The people that deal more with that than us.
I just noticed that in that resolution from 11 years ago, where this commission approved the 2010 adjusted urban area boundaries, that there was a whereas clause that talked about billboards.
And we all work so hard on sign ordinances.
Yeah.
It just really seems like a new battle. But any other questions or comments for staff? If not, this was just informational. So it's coming. October this year.
Yeah, October, and just stay tuned if you're a community that's on the edges of those boundaries for those emails to schedule meetings with us.
Mr. Resky.
I did send that email out to 9 different communities in the 3 different counties.
Thank you.
So there are 9 different, as I was saying, there's 9 different communities that are directly affected by this smoothing exercise or by this UZA boundaries. And of course, the 3 different counties.
No other questions? We'll move on to programming. And it deals with the TIP 2022-2026. We'll start with the public comment amendment 22 and of the 2022-2026 transportation improvement program. Mr. Bransky.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. So I have one resolution and one amendment before you. Resolution 23-11 is for amendment 22-10. That's not confusing at all. And it's shown is an attachment in the packet beginning on page 7 to page 16. Concerning the public comment report, the projects listed in these amendments were released for public comment on June 13th and closed on July 4th with the fireworks. As stated in the public comment report on page 7, one question was received during this time. A commenter had asked if Hammond's local tracks project, the Governor's Parkway, I believe it's called, Governor's Parkway Bridge, was a project that was in the amendment, and it, by the way, is not. The email was forwarded to the City of Hammond and the project managers followed. Prior to sending the amendments out for public comment, we sent the amendments to members of the Intergovernmental Consultation Group, or the ICG, for their comments on June 12th. With NERC's agreement with the ICG, if no response is received within 7 days, concurrence is granted. We did not receive any comments from these members of the ICG. Therefore, approval was given by members of the concurrent for their concurrence. Now, that I said it, no response was received in the time, but we did receive response from members of the ICG afterwards. So we are still working through that. Neither one of those are significant. Basically, the comments were clarification on two different projects. One was an NDOT project and one was Cheryl's project. The comment for Cheryl's project, we were moving significant amount of funds between the different phases on the Kennedy Avenue project. So therefore, to add significant amount of funds to one of the phases, we needed to, needs to be part of the amendment. And the comment from the ICG was that project part of our long range plan? And it is. The comment concerning NDOT's project was because number 1900177. It was a clarification of the statement in the description, which stated left turning improvements along State Road corridor. So this is a road rehab resurface going from US 20 to US 31 along State Road 2. And their clarification statement was what is meant by left turning improvements. It is NERC's understanding in a statement from the project designer that NDOT has since removed any significant left turning improvements along the corridor. And that was just received within the last week. So that was the public comment report. Moving on to the amendment.
Charles, you have
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
First of all, who did you get the clarification on 1900-177 from? Do you recall?
I gave it to, I thought it was John Krugerberg. John Krugerberg gave it to Reed,
Okay,
Miss Reed,
all right. And then-
and she reached out to Bollinger or Lockbeater, I think is what
Okay.
the designer is.
Yeah, that's fine. All right. And then on the Hammond Tracks project?
Yes,
There was an email forwarded to Hammond and the project manager for follow-up. So I just want to be clear, this is in the current tip instead?
yes it is.
Okay, by the previous amendment,
Yes,
okay.
it was in there previously, and
It's amendment 22-53,
yes.
okay. I just felt like that was left open by the way this was answered. that
Okay.
It needed follow-up, but it does not need any follow-up.
No, they actually, the statement or the question was, is the Governor's Parkway Bridge included in this
Okay.
amendment? That was what the question was.
And it's not in this amendment, but it is in the current
Yes,
tip and step.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the Governor, yeah, that project is not in this amendment,
Right,
but it is in the tip.
correct. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Moving on to the amendments. The amendments, project lists are attached in the commission of the TPC packet. There are 6 projects which are either new or modifications for fiscal years 24 and 25, and include 3 new projects for NDOT, which is 1 bridge rehabilitation project, bridge overlay, and 2 road rehabilitation, 1 CPR or concrete rehab, and 1 asphalt overlay. The city of LaPorte eliminated a sidewalk project. Porter County added a new bridge replacement project. And Cherryville, as I mentioned earlier, added a substantial amount of funding for right-of-way to phase 2. That money was originally in phase 4, but we, in the past, to clarify the NEPA process, we had to clarify which phases were which, and so the funds needed to move with that. We didn't do it at that time, so we had to do it this time. And that project is going to construction in 2025. Are there any questions?
Any questions at all? Comments? Yeah.
If there are any discrepancies we noticed in the spreadsheet that was part of the PDF that's online, what's the best way to,
That is part of the adoption.
okay,
What's your thought?
okay.
Anyone else? Charlie? You just told Beth to hold her thought.
Yes, for the next, for 4.4.
Thank you.
So
If
I
there are
would
no
like,
questions, let's proceed.
So do we need to make a recommendation to the commission to approve the TIP amendment, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we should. On this is resolution 2311. That's separate from what we're going to go on to, isn't it, Charles?
yes,
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Move to recommend to the commission amendment resolution number, 23-11.
Second.
Second by Mr. Topol. Any other comments, considerations, questions? Not all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody object to it? So moved. Sorry about the confusion. It was my confusion. But let's move on to 4.3.
so the public comment report for the 2024 to 2028 TIP adoption, which is on page 17. NERC is required to hold one public comment, and NERC held that public comment open house meeting on April 5th. That was, we had a public comment between March 6th and April 7th. Additional open houses were held in Hammond at the Purdue Northwest Campus, Michigan City, the Public Library, Valparaiso, the public, Porter County Government Building. An additional public meeting was held along with NDOT for their state project, for their state STIP on May 24th. There were no comments pertaining to TIP that were received during any of these public meetings. NERC did submit the draft TIP to NDOT and USDOT, and two comments were of concern were reported from Federal Highway. The first comments revolved around small deficits showing in 2024 for both UZAs and in 2026 for the Michigan City UZA. These have been corrected. We're not allowed to operate with deficit. My bad in showing that. So, and the second comment related to the funds that were loaned very recently to another MPO. If you don't know, we cannot spend our funds, and if I see that we are at risk of losing our funds, we have a couple different options, one of which is loaning it to another MPO or loaning it to NDOT. And we do make that available to other MPOs. And the comment relating is how we show those funds coming back. And we do show that. So a statement was included in the TIP on that. And that's it for the public comment report.
Beth, did you have
Concerning Beth's question about projects that seem to be missed from the PDF, bring it to my attention, please.
I sent an email.
Okay. I will look into it and get it corrected as quickly as possible.
Good.
I'll have one too, Charles.
Okay. Yes, please let me know. I tried to be perfect, but there's only one person that on this earth that's ever been perfect, and I'm very far from that.
Likewise, you're, you know,
So please let me know.
any other comments or questions? If not, do we have action? Requesting a recommendation to the commission for the best workforce Indiana 2024.
Motion to recommend the commission, subject to minor technical corrections to the plan.
Specific to Hammond and Valparaiso.
Or other.
Okay.
I'll second.
Second, okay. Any other comment or thought? Oh, David's second. Sorry, that's okay. As Charles said, nobody's perfect. There you go. Goodness gracious. Any other comments or questions? If not, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? So moved, this will be recommended at the next regular meeting.
I would like to point out, though, that with approval by the commission, it does not mean that our tip will automatically be sent to NDOT. NERC has an air quality conformity issue that we are trying to work out with the EPA. There's several NPOs I think that are also sharing the same issues that we are sharing. So until that gets worked out, we're hoping that will get worked out sometime in September or October. When that gets worked out, then we will send it to NDOT. NDOT has, as I mentioned, has reviewed it. So, but we're going to be, I hate saying being like a broken record, but we're going to be in limbo until that happens. But at least it's off our plate and waiting for when that gets approved, then we can just vote it on.
We're all progressing.
Yes. Thank you.
With the planning done, I'd like us to introduce ourselves for the record for the meeting. I'm Kevin Bright, Steve Davenport, Cancer Bear, Chairman.
Lynch Barlow, the NERC staff.
Flora Baum, nursing staff.
David Wright, Gary Transit.
Anthony Sigmund, McKee Purchasing Manager.
Rebecca Hammond, Safety Summer Intern.
Kay Nelson, Northwest Indiana Forum.
Dean Button, City of Hammond.
Lisa Schrader, NDOT Gulfport District.
Pat Schrader, City of Valparaiso Transit.
Mark Odell, Town of Chesterton.
George Topol, trustee, Township of Porter County.
Brian Lissick, Director in Indiana.
Captain Lee, NERC staff.
Charles Bradsky, NERC staff.
Angela Stratman, Director in Indiana.
Eric Fullerton, American Structure Point.
Scott Pruitt, District Engineering.
Terry Martin, Jerry Gable. Tom Schmidt with the Town of Sherrill.
Jeff Hewitt, Town of Sherrill.
And Whitenut, nursing staff.
Stephen Hughes, Safety staff.
Grace Cunningham, nursing staff.
Scott Weber, nursing staff.
Lou Ritzler, NDOT.
I don't think I've forgotten anybody. Speak up if I have. Now, thank you. Let's go to topical committee reports. Do we have any committees here that would like to report about their meetings? Cut down.
We don't meet till next month, so you'll get word of that.
Charles, T-Rock.
Team Rock will be meeting on August 15th. There's going to be a lot going on with that one, so please attend. And we're also doing quarterly meetings on several dates. They might be June 26th, June 27th, August 4th, or August 8th. So
July.
August 4th, August 8th, July 26th, and July 27th.
We're okay.
Land use committee is August 30th.
August 30th in this room. 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock.
Usually it's small.
10 o'clock.
It was originally August 30th. Other topics, Porter County Fair.
Do we have reports from any planning partners? Mr. Alyssa.
Good morning, everyone. Ryan Lissick, Dry Clean, Indiana. So just to give some updates, we do have these notes available if you want to take them home, or I can always send them by email. But just giving some updates on the charging and fueling infrastructure grant that was submitted back in June. With ERC as the prime on that, with multiple partners in both public and private. We submitted a $15 million grant request for 41 locations for clean fuel infrastructure across Lake, Porter, and the Port counties. In total, there was 23 level 2 charging stations, 16 direct current fast charging stations with a minimum of 150 kW per port, and 2 CNG stations. And then additionally, we had a set aside of just around $800,000 for more projects to be allocated to this program. This is once again 80% funding, and I believe we had over $18.3 million ask, or $18.3 million project total, excuse me. Multiple NERC NOFA projects updating as far as meeting with the cities to get our 2024 projects off the ground, and we constantly meeting on a weekly basis. In 2020, last month we submitted over 6 applications for the 2023 Vehicle Technologies Office for clean fuel infrastructure and equipment. Additionally, we do have video projects for City of Crown Point, Town of Highland, and the City of Portage, highlighting some of the projects that have been completed as of recently. Some of the upcoming events, we have the EPA Regions 5 meeting in Chicago the end of this week. We do have an Empower webinar that is our workplace charging initiative that will be on July 18th. And then there is a NEVI, that is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, that will be hosted by INDOT. They have a meeting at IUN from 6 to 8 p.m. on July 24th. That is going to be discussion of all the infrastructure that's coming across funding-wise for the state of Indiana, being handled by INDOT. We do have our Indiana Clean School Bus Consortium coming up on August 8th. August 13th, we have a partnership Clean Air Day at the Gary South Shore Railcats. We do have our annual Clean Fuel Conference coming on August 23rd. There's a bunch of more projects that are, or events that are available, just to try and keep it short and sweet. There are some funding opportunities that we're currently working on. There is the EPA Clean School Bus Program, that's $400 million available, and there's $51.6 million available for Region 5 schools. Applications are due August 23rd, and our plan is to submit one unified application for 100 school buses for the state. Additionally, there is the Reconnecting Communities grant opportunity that just came out. As it relates to this application is due beginning of September. There's $198 million for Reconnecting Communities pilot program and $3.15 billion for the Neighborhood Access and Equity program. If you have any questions on that, once again, I have a bunch of information, handouts for that, please let me know. Thank you.
Any questions? Carolyn? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything to report? Yes, Kate?
We're not official reporting people, but the Northwest Indiana Forum is updating the 7-county strategic plan, Ignite the Region. During the course of the summer, the leadership team that was part of its original planning and the other supporting teams under the different pillars are all working to update that. And the emergency folks all been tapped. We all know we're after more information, updates, stuff. We just wanted to let people know that that activity is ongoing. And that's it.
Yes, David.
Real quick, and this is relevant to Kay and to Brian. They helped us get our electric buses. 3 of them are on site. And we're expecting the 4th sometime in the next couple of weeks. We will be revealing them as a fleet on the morning of August 9th at IU Northwest. Most of you will probably be on the mailing list for an invite for that. So get this to your inboxes. We are looking at it as probably one of the most significant things we've done in a long time. And it has been a long time coming.
Exciting times.
Yeah.
And just for clarification, because I had an ethics document 16
Right.
pages long, I recused myself from voting on that application.
Okay.
As a member of the
But still, the committee,
BW Advisory Board,
yes.
Trust Fund Advisory Board, whatever we are,
Pages long.
I don't know. It was just annoying. I had to sit through a video and it's like, okay, fine, there's not enough money on the face of the earth for me to be unethical, but that's fine.
If there's nothing else good for the cause, all of our future emergency meetings are on your, are published and on today on the website. The next technical planning committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 12th, 2023 at 10 a.m. in this office. And thank you all for your contributions and your participation. Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. That was a 3.
That's.